My name is Claudia Carter. I've been a colleague and friend of Carolyn since she first came to Berkeley many years ago together, and it is my great pleasure to get to introduce her to you today. Now, we all know there's very little point in me mentioning at this point the accomplishments of Carolyn in this gathering. Everybody here is aware of her very long list of professional contributions, or you wouldn't be here. So most of us are aware of that these accomplishments and contributions are really a renaissance kind of array of involvements. They cross-cut history, culture, ethics, philosophy, ecofeminism, conservation, environmental politics and action, and some fields that have not yet been named. But I have to say, it's a particular pleasure to introduce Carolyn at the end of this symposium with the announcement of her retirement, or I have to say her alleged retirement. Okay? This is what we're celebrating, Carolyn's alleged retirement, and most of you are absolutely fully aware of why I use that term, alleged. For just when we think that Carolyn has just finished her magnum opus, okay, she presents us with a new treatise, a new story, some new dimension that she's explored, and that for better and for worse in terms of our time and involvement, we have to take account of. I recently had this experience walking into her office, which is only a few feet from mine, okay, thinking that I was discussing her logistics of closing up her vast library in this den of vibrant thought and student dialogue, only with yet a new volume from a different part of the spectrum. This time, it was a thoughtful exploration of the life of John James Audubon and his entire historical context, psychology, culture, almost every dimension imaginable. So, as an avid bird watcher myself, I had yet one more, not to be the last, new homework assignment. This is a woman who could go on a cross-country trip, for example, a husband, Charlie, in an RV all the way across the country, nature watching, rock watching, animal watching, and so forth, for us to all read by the end. But we should never, ever make the mistake of identifying Carolyn with this multiple list of volumes she has produced and an incredible range of environmental and social topics. Is it 12? Is it 13? I'm not really up to date. But because this is a woman who through it all has been and also remains a warrior for the promotion of interdisciplinary studies. And that means for her in her daily life, fighting for the flexibility for young people to figure out creative ways to get themselves educated at this university. This is a woman who is in her daily life, a tireless supporter of graduate students, obviously we have been hearing, and undergraduate students who want to talk over and really go deep into their own thoughts about nature and society, not her thoughts, their thoughts as well, and find ways that they're going to be useful in trying to save this earth and its creatures. This is a woman who has always been and remains a steadfast friend to many, many across this country and well beyond, many of whom are here, all superimposed on her life, really as the most amazing wife and the most amazing mother of some incredible sons, some of whom I know. So I want to introduce to you Carolyn Merchant, who has to be revered in our ecological circles as, I suppose we would say, a rare flower amongst the weeds, but I would like to correct that to be a rare weed amongst the cultigens.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing, Claudia. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for coming and everybody who has said and written and been here for me. And I want to especially thank Ken and Elizabeth and Whitney for starting this whole idea and the whole project of After the Death of Nature. And for one amazing day when they took me to Saul's restaurant and said, we'd love to have breakfast with you. And they tell me that this volume is in progress. I would have said no, but it's already almost finished. thank you so much. And I just want to say that the volume itself, there are some flyers out there. It will be in hardcover as well as paperback. And Ken says the latest word is August. Yeah. And there is a copy of the manuscript there for people to look at. And anyway, that is just a wonderful thing. And I am also so honored by the people at the GTU and Rita Sharma and Devin Zuber and all the volunteers from the GTU for co-sponsoring this conference. I want to thank Paul Roger for doing the videotaping and live stream. He's been steadfast through this whole project, and thank you and your assistance for this. And everyone who has come so far, Sverker from Sweden and Baird from Memphis, right? Which he says is on another planet because it took something like 10 days for his permission form to reach me. And thank you all, and Holmes, who came from Colorado, and Mark, who came from Texas, and just amazing. And I'm thrilled. I don't know how to thank you all, but I also am humbled and I'm thrilled both at once. And I love today. So I thank you for all those insights and wonderful ideas. I do want to just say a little bit about this program. And the picture on the cover of the program was taken by my son, Dave Iltis. Where is Dave? There he is in the back, taking more pictures. But this was me at my desk in my office, as Ken showed before, while I still had books there. Now, all of these books were packed up. The shelves are empty. They went across the country by FedEx Freight, and they arrived in the National Conservation Training Center, which is a branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service of the federal government. And they have a library there. And these books are all going to stay together, all 3,200 volumes or so, as the Carolyn Merchant Collection. And they are being cataloged by World Cat, and so they will be available for people to cite and also for people to borrow or to do research on. But the most amazing thing is they are being housed next door to the Rachel Carson collection. And these are Rachel Carson's, many of her papers, not all of them, but many of them. And Douglas, I think you have used that collection and worked with Mark Madison there. And so the next time you go, you can use the Carolyn Merchant collection.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
It is amazing. And the National Conservation Training Center is on the banks of the Potomac. And so the Carolyn Merchant collection is overlooking the Potomac, and it's a big thrill because had I given them to any other organization, it would have all been split up and some of them would have been recycled and so on. So I'm deeply appreciative. So the bookshelves are now empty. Carolyn Merchant is going to be expelled from her office because they are going to upgrade Giannini Hall, and we're all being moved out in the early fall, and we'll be a year and a half or 2 years, and so that will be the last time probably that I will see the office is sometime over the summer. I also just want to talk about this image on the back. And this is an image of Bryce Canyon. And why is this image here? I just want to read 2 paragraphs from my book. It's this recent book that I put together, my life articles and stories, Science and Nature, Past, Present, and Future. And this is how it starts. The shadows lengthened on the red, yellow, and brown pillars of the canyon walls. A panoply of moving colors bathed hundreds of eroded limestone spires as the sun sank over the sculpted peaks. In front of me, my 2 young sons, 11 and 13 years old, picked their way along a narrow trail across a maze of rock outcrops that dropped precipitously to the river below. We watched as a red-tailed hawk ascended the updrafts on the high peaks. The view was breathtaking, the colors magnificent, the rocks vibrant and alive. It was the summer of 1975. The place was Bryce Canyon, Utah, and the 3 of us were exploring the canyon lands of the American West. After our evening meal in the park campground, the boys fell into an exhausted slumber. I lay awake, pondering the irony of the living rocks. Science viewed them as dead and inert. Yet for much of human history, those very rocks had been alive, growing and reproducing like plants and animals. It was then that the title of a book I had been sculpting for several years emerged into clear relief. The Death of Nature was christened. Also, I want to point out that on this program, there is a picture down here, and the quote on the bottom is my partnership ethic. And it says, a partnership ethic holds that the greatest good for the human and non-human communities is in their mutual living interdependence. And that is the ethic that first began to emerge. I mention it in the end of my book, Ecological Revolutions, but it emerged really full-blown at the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, where we had an enormous tent in which all the women congregated. There were heads of state from all over the world, and we had panels up in front. And when I came to give my talk, I had fully articulated my partnership ethic and the precepts, the 5 precepts that Deborah read and others showed. And so that was the emergence of my idea of how humans can interact with what we think of as non-human nature now, but was actually alive for much of human history. I want to also talk about a couple of books that have recently appeared that I've been working on. One of them is called Autonomous Nature. And that book covers much of the area from Greco-Roman times to the scientific revolution that the Death of Nature covers. But this book emphasizes nature as uncontrollable, nature as unpredictable, and nature as sort of just erupting at various points. So autonomous nature is exemplified by earthquakes. We can predict an earthquake 20 seconds in advance, or we can predict its probabilities over, say, 100 years. We know sometime in the next 100 years, there'll be an earthquake on the Hayward Fault where we're sitting right now. but we won't know until 20 seconds before. So that's autonomous nature. And even if we could predict when it was going to come, we could not control it. So mechanism gives way here to chaos and complexity. Tsunamis. We don't know what will produce a tsunami. If an earthquake occurs, will there be a tsunami? Volcanoes. We can't predict when the volcanoes will erupt. We can hear the rumblings and so on. We may know that it might happen, but suddenly it happens. And that in the Lisbon volcanic explosions and earthquakes and so on. So nature cannot always be predicted. And even if it could be, it couldn't be controlled. Now, most of our life, almost everything, we can predict and control. Otherwise, we wouldn't drive across the Bay Bridge. But we know that if an earthquake occurs, we're in trouble while we're on the bridge. So we take our lives in hand. However, most of our lives are living in the mechanistic worldview. But yet we have this new image of nature as really stemming, first of all, from quantum mechanics and probability theories and so on. But then that has to do with the interatomic levels and quantum dimensions, wave theory and so on in the atoms. But in the real world, in the 1970s, chaos and complexity theory emerged to affect our everyday life. And one of those effects is climate change. And climate change, we may know it's occurring, we may know in general what's happening, but there are a whole lot of cascading, multiplying effects where some of the things that are happening we cannot really predict. And we're having an awfully hard time controlling them. And the way to do that is go over totally, as soon as we can, to renewables, wind, water, hydro, and try to do that. A lot of places have committed to going over to renewables by 2030 or by 2040, and many places all over the world by 2050. So my book that I'm working on now is on the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene was a concept that was proposed by Paul Crutzen and Eugene Sturmer. Although it had been around, Sturmer had been using it since the 1980s, but in 2000, in their famous one-page paper, and they said the Anthropocene really begins with James Watt's steam engine in 1785. And they say it may go on for decades and hundreds of years. My theory, however, is that the Anthropocene is exemplified most clearly by fossil fuel burning, and that puts CO2 into the atmosphere, and railroads and canals, steamboats, automobiles, finally airplanes and so on, are all putting CO2 into the atmosphere. And so we need to stop as soon as possible. There will be lingering effects, but my hope is that by 2050, with these major commitments all over the planet, that we will have gotten to the turning point where we can move out of the age of the Anthropocene into an age of sustainability. Not sustainable development, which that term was used in the 1980s, but an age of sustainability based on an interaction between humans and the animate, inanimate world of ecological relations, and that will be exemplified in the partnership ethic. So I want to conclude with that and ask if anybody have any. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes for a few questions or comments before we wind this up. Wow. Almost.
Again, sustainability by all means, but the Anthropocene zealots want a whole lot more than that. They want to re-engineer the planet for better usefulness to humans. How about that aspect of the Anthropocene epoch?
Well, I think that they're wrong, and I don't think they're going to win. I think that there is so much consciousness, not everywhere, of course, but there's so much consciousness. And of course, one of the toughest things is capitalism, and how we're going to really deal with that. But I think there's hope, and I think there's a possibility of a new story. And spirituality and religion has got to be part of that, because there are only something like 1% of us who are atheists and agnostics, and almost everybody has some form of religious commitment and spirituality. And so I'm so grateful to all of you who've been here today, who have talked about it and what is being done in the Graduate Theological Union, and by all of you who have written about it. And my book on the Anthropocene has a whole chapter on religion. And I think that has to be a major portion of what we see as a transformative force in the future.
And then when that happens, you still want to call it the Anthropocene epoch?
No, I don't want to see anything about the Anthropocene anymore after 2050. I want the age of sustainability. And I'm hoping that my possible grandchildren might see that era come. Okay, yes.
What about the idea that the Anthropocene really started over 5,000 years ago with the large-scale rice cultivation?
Yeah,
methane emissions have actually been transforming our climate for.
Exactly. Well, I deal with that in my book. I think the Anthropocene in those terms means almost anything and everything that humans have done to change the planet. But what specifically is the most problematic and most threatening are fossil fuels and CO2 and methane and other gases, greenhouse gases, that are changing the planet in a dramatic way. And the curves go like that. Yeah. And there's a fluctuation point around the 1950s. And if we don't stop that curve and make it go like that, we're in a lot of trouble. And I think there's a huge number of people who are committed to doing that. And there are huge political forces committed to doing it. I mean, a lot of communities, a lot of counties and states, countries are committing to renewable energy by 2030 and hopefully by 2050. One more question, and then I think we're ready to move on. Yes.
Carolyn, your work has built so many bridges, but one of the bridges it's built is between activists and making change in the world, and knowledge generation, and university institutions. I'm wondering if you would say a little bit of what your vision is of how there are so many professors and university folks in this room. What do you see as being an inspiring role for universities going forward to really be at service to activism?
Well, we have the College of Natural Resources, and we are paid to do research that benefits the people of California. And we do that in terms of research and new ideas and new projects that then are implemented through the cooperative extension. And we have people who take those ideas and work with local farmers and native peoples and many even petroleum companies in order to try to move toward a kind of research that benefits the people. So I think that's one way that academics, at least in my college and my department, have been able to make change. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Wow. That's amazing.
Love you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is, yes, thank you. You're all so wonderful.